Before we begin, where are you right now? What city? What country? And what time is it where you are? Tell me in the comments. I am curious how far this story will travel tonight. If you are new here, welcome. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We uncover histories that others have forgotten. Now, a question that will shape everything you hear. What if the oldest city on Earth was not destroyed by flood or famine or conquest? What if it was annihilated deliberately by the very beings who built it? This is the story of Eridu, the first city, the city of the star gods, and the war that erased it from history. The evidence is buried in ancient texts, in radioactive ruins, in DNA sequences we still do not fully understand. Tonight, we go back to the beginning, to the war that changed everything. Act 1. The Architect and the Storm. Chapter 1. The City of the Star Gods. Eridu was not what you have been told. Forget the images of mud brick villages. Forget the primitive huts rising from marshland. Those are the lies of later ages, told by those who could not understand what they were looking at. Eridu was Station 1, the first outpost of an interstellar mission, a biotechnological fortress rising from the Persian Gulf marshlands approximately 445,000 years ago. The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest written documents in human possession, states it plainly. Kingship descended from heaven. It descended at Eridu, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Kingship, civilization, technology descended from the sky and landed at Eridu. The city's name in Sumerian was Eridu, the house built far away. Far from what? Far from where the builders came from. Far from home. When archaeologists excavated Tel Abu Shirain in southern Iraq, they found something that troubled their assumptions. 18 distinct layers of construction, one atop another, stretching back further than conventional chronology permits. The deepest layers showed no primitive development, no gradual evolution from simple to complex. The sophistication was there from the beginning, as if the builders arrived already knowing exactly what they were doing. At the center of Eridu stood something the Sumerians called the Abzu. Modern translations render this as freshwater ocean or underground sea, but the texts describe something far more specific. The Abzu was Enki's domain, his laboratory, his power source. A subterranean complex containing the technologies that made Eridu possible. Water flowed through engineered channels. The flow was controlled precisely. Temperature differentials created energy that could be harvested. But the Abzu also processed that water, purified it, extracted minerals, prepared solutions for various applications. It was factory, power plant, and laboratory combined. The god who ruled the Abzu was called Enki, Lord of the Earth, Master of the Sweet Waters, the Wise One. But Enki was no god in the sense later religions would define the term. He was an engineer, a geneticist, a scientist administrator responsible for the most important project his people had ever undertaken. The mission was simple in concept and staggering in execution. extract gold from Earth's crust in quantities sufficient to save a dying world. The Anunnaki homeworld, whether we call it Nibiru or something else entirely, faced atmospheric crisis. Gold particles suspended in the upper atmosphere could reflect radiation and stabilize climate. Earth had gold. Earth had water. Earth could be made to serve. But extraction required infrastructure. Infrastructure required workers. And the Anunnaki who came to Earth were scientists and administrators, not miners. This is where the story takes its first dark turn. Within the Abzu, Enki kept something else, something the other Anunnaki commanders did not fully understand. The MEs. Sumerian texts describe the MEs as divine decrees or powers of civilization. They enabled kingship, priesthood, warfare, agriculture, music, law. Whoever possessed the MEs possessed the ability to create civilization itself. Modern interpretations have treated the MEs as abstract concepts, but the texts describe them as physical objects, objects that could be carried, stolen, given, lost. Tablets, crystals, data storage devices containing the source code for everything the Anunnaki knew: astronomy, medicine, genetic engineering, energy production, weapons technology, architecture, navigation, mathematics. The MEs were backup drives for an entire civilization's knowledge, and Enki kept them in Eridu, in the chambers beneath the Abzu. The ziggurats that rose above Mesopotamian cities were not merely temples. Their stepped design created resonance chambers. Energy could be transmitted from the Abzu through the ziggurat and broadcast across the surrounding region. Think of it as an ancient power grid. The ziggurat was the transmission tower. The Abzu was the generating station. The city's devices were the consumers. Without the MEs, you could have the hardware and not understand how to use it. With the MEs, but without the hardware, you could know what to build, but lack the infrastructure. Eridu had both. That was what made it dangerous to Enlil's faction. A complete, functional, independent technological civilization under Enki's control. Picture the city as it once was, not mud and reed, but gleaming structures aligned with stellar precision, ziggurats that were energy transmitters, drawing power from the earth and channeling it to where it was needed. Landing platforms where craft descended from orbit. Vimanas, the texts would later call them. Flying vehicles that moved between installations across the planet. And at the center of it all, Enki, working in his laboratory, creating something that would change everything. Chapter 2. The Lulu Experiment. The gold extraction was falling behind schedule. The Anunnaki workers, a class called the Igigi, had been laboring in the mines for generations. Earth time moved differently than the cycles they were accustomed to. The work was grinding. The conditions were brutal. The Igigi rebelled. They burned their tools. They surrounded the compound of Enlil, the mission commander. They demanded relief, or they would abandon the project entirely. Enlil was Enki's half-brother, where Enki was the scientist, the creator, the one who understood systems. Enlil was the military commander, the enforcer, the one who maintained order. Enlil's solution to the rebellion was simple: crush it, execute the leaders, force the others back to work. But Enki proposed something different, something that would change the trajectory of Earth forever. He had been studying the indigenous life forms, the hominids that roamed the savannas and forests. They were intelligent enough to use tools, strong enough to work, but not intelligent enough to understand what they were doing. Perfect workers, if they could be modified. In the chambers of the Abzu, Enki began the Lulu Experiment. Lulu Amelu, the mixed worker, a hybrid organism combining Anunnaki genetic material with that of Earth's most promising hominid species. The texts describe the process in startling detail. 14 birth goddesses, artificial wombs, careful monitoring of development, multiple failures before success. What emerged was humanity, Homo sapiens, a species that did not evolve naturally, but was engineered for a purpose. The experiment succeeded beyond expectations. The Lulu workers were strong, adaptable, and capable of following instructions. They could mine gold. They could build structures. They could serve. The Ajiji were relieved of the worst labor. The mission continued. Everyone was satisfied. Everyone except Enki. Because Enki had done something the other Anunnaki did not know about. Something that would eventually tear their civilization apart. He had upgraded the design. The original Lulu was meant to be intelligent enough to work, but not intelligent enough to question. A biological machine, a tool with hands. But Enki gave humanity something more. Consciousness, self-awareness, the capacity for abstract thought, the ability to understand their own existence. The biblical story of the Tree of Knowledge is a distant echo of this moment. The forbidden fruit was not an apple. It was genetic modification. Enki gave humanity the capacity to know, and Enlil was furious. The command structure of the Anunnaki mission was clear. Enlil was in charge of Earth operations. Enki was supposed to solve problems, not create new ones. And conscious humans were definitely a problem. They asked questions. They sought understanding. They formed relationships with their Anunnaki overseers. Some Anunnaki began to see them not as tools, but as people. Worse, they bred. Rapidly. Their population expanded beyond any projection. The Eden, the enclosed bioreserve where the first humans were kept, could not contain them. Enlil demanded population control, sterilization, culling. The humans were biological robots that had gotten out of hand. They needed to be reduced to manageable numbers. Enki refused. This was the moment the schism became irreparable. Two factions formed within the Anunnaki mission. The Enki faction, scientists, teachers, those who saw humanity as a creation worth nurturing. They believed the experiment had succeeded better than planned, and that humans could become partners rather than servants. The Enlil faction, military commanders, administrators, those who saw humanity as a tool that had exceeded its parameters. They believed strict control was necessary to prevent chaos. The split would define everything that followed. When Enlil finally expelled humanity from the Eden, forcing them out of the protected zone and into the harsh world beyond, it was Enki who sheltered them. Eridu became a sanctuary city. The humans Enlil wanted destroyed found protection within Enki's domain, and Enki continued teaching them, not just how to work, but how to think, how to build, how to understand the world around them. agriculture, medicine, architecture, writing. The foundations of civilization itself, encoded in the MEs, were shared with humanity. Eridu became not just a sanctuary, but a school, and its graduates spread across Mesopotamia, carrying knowledge with them. But every gift created tension. Every teaching widened the divide. And Enlil watched, and waited, and planned. Chapter 3. The Council of Nibiru. Above Earth, watching everything, was King Anu. Anu was the father of both Enki and Enlil, the supreme authority of the Anunnaki. His word was law, and his silence was permission. The sibling rivalry between Enki and Enlil was ancient, stretching back long before the Earth mission. Enki was firstborn, but by a lesser wife. Enlil was younger, but born of the royal line. The succession was contested. The resentment was permanent. And now it had found a new battlefield. From his position in orbit, or perhaps from Nibiru itself, Anu observed the growing conflict. He received reports from both sides. He understood the implications, and he chose not to intervene. Some historians of the Anunnaki suggest this was wisdom. Let the brothers resolve their differences. Let the stronger position prevail. Direct intervention would only delay the inevitable conflict. Others suggest it was something darker. Anu played his sons against each other, maintaining his own position by ensuring neither could fully consolidate power. Whatever his reasoning, Anu's silence allowed the tension to escalate. Enlil called a formal council. The matter of Eridu had to be resolved. His demands were specific. Enki must surrender the rogue humans living in Eridu. The sanctuary city policy must end. And the MEs, those precious data crystals containing civilization's source code, must be transferred to neutral custody. The subtext was clear. Enlil wanted Eridu dismantled. He wanted Enki's power base destroyed. And he wanted humanity returned to the status of controlled assets. Enki's response was equally clear. No. Eridu was his city. The humans were under his protection. The MEs belonged to whoever could use them wisely, and that was not Enlil. Enki declared Eridu a sanctuary in perpetuity. Any Anunnaki who wished to study with him, any human who sought knowledge, would be welcome within its walls. This was more than defiance. This was a challenge to the entire command structure. Enki was saying, in effect, that moral authority trumped military authority. Enlil's response was not long in coming. Ninurta was Enlil's son, and he was everything his father valued. A warrior, a commander, absolutely loyal to the chain of command. He had earned his reputation in conflicts across the Anunnaki domain. When there was fighting to be done, Ninurta was the one who did it. Now Ninurta began gathering forces. The Stormbirds, the Anunnaki term for their aerial combat craft, were being prepared. Weapon systems that had been dormant since arrival were being activated. Communications between Enlil's faction commanders increased. Something was being planned. Enki was not blind to these preparations. He had his own loyalists, his own sources of information, and he had Marduk. Marduk was Enki's firstborn son, and he had inherited his father's ambition along with his intelligence. Where Enki preferred diplomacy and teaching, Marduk was more willing to use force when necessary. Under Marduk's direction, Eridu's defenses were activated. The city had been built with contingencies, energy shields, sonic weapons, defensive systems that had never been tested in actual combat. Now they would be. The war drums had begun. Both sides were preparing, and the humans caught in the middle could only watch and pray to gods who were about to tear each other apart. Act 2. The War of the Gods. Chapter 4. The Skies of Mesopotamia. The first attack came without warning. Modern imagination pictures ancient warfare as swords and shields, Bronze Age weapons clashing in dusty plains. But this was not that kind of war. This was directed energy weapons against sonic barriers. This was aerial bombardment against force shields. This was technological warfare at a level that would not be seen again on Earth for millennia. Ninurta's storm birds came from the north, screaming down the Tigris Valley at speeds no chariot could match. Their targets were the outlying settlements that supported Eridu, the farms, the workshops, the smaller communities that fed and supplied the sanctuary city. The thunderbolts of Enlil, as the weapons were called, struck with devastating precision. Structures were pulverized instantly. Stone walls shattered into dust. Fires erupted and burned beyond any ability to contain them. The people in those settlements had no defense. They were not combatants. They were farmers, craftsmen, families. They died confused and terrified, never understanding why the sky had turned against them. The message was clear: surrender Eridu, or watch everything around it burn. But Eridu itself was another matter. Enki had designed the city's defenses himself, and he had designed them well. The central district was protected by a field that conventional weapons could not penetrate. When Ninurta's forces attempted direct assault on Eridu, they discovered what the Abzu's power grid was actually capable of. The defensive system was based on harmonic technology, sonic frequencies that could disrupt matter at the molecular level. The same principle that, according to some researchers, brought down the walls of Jericho thousands of years later. As attacking craft approached Eridu's perimeter, they began experiencing equipment failures. Navigation systems went haywire. Structural integrity weakened. Several craft simply came apart in midair, their components scattered across the marshlands. Ninurta lost ships, he lost pilots, and he could not touch Eridu's core. The attackers withdrew to regroup, and Marduk seized the moment. Counterattack came from Eridu's remaining aerial assets. Marduk led sorties against Enlil's forward positions. Supply lines were cut. Communication relays were destroyed. The momentum shifted, briefly. But this was not a war that could be won by defensive brilliance alone. Eridu was one city. Enlil controlled most of the Anunnaki infrastructure on Earth. The spaceport at Sipar, the mission control center at Nippur, the mining operations in Africa, the communications network that linked everything together. Enki had moral authority and superior technology in a limited area. Enlil had resources, numbers, and time. The war of the gods had begun, and neither side could afford to lose. The weapons described in the texts were sophisticated beyond anything conventional archaeology admits. The storm birds were not primitive aircraft. They operated on principles we are only beginning to rediscover: acoustic levitation, electromagnetic propulsion, vehicles that did not need wheels or wings in any conventional sense. The thunderbolts of Enlil appear to have been directed energy weapons, focused beams that could shatter structures instantly. Not explosive, but destructive through concentrated force. Enki's defensive systems worked differently. They disrupted rather than destroyed. Sonic frequencies that interfered with enemy equipment, electromagnetic pulses that shut down attacking craft. The contrast is significant. Enlil favored weapons that destroyed. Enki preferred weapons that disabled. Even in war, their philosophies differed. The Vimanas described in the Mahabharata matched the storm birds precisely. Mercury vortex engines, spherical or disc-shaped craft, capabilities that defy conventional aerospace understanding. The Agnya missiles were self-guided weapons that sought their targets. Fire and forget technology. Launch and let the weapon find what it was aimed at. These descriptions span cultures separated by thousands of miles. Sanskrit texts from India, cuneiform tablets from Iraq. Different languages describing the same things. The technology was global because the Anunnaki presence was global. The war was global because their infrastructure was global. What happened in Mesopotamia echoed across the planet. Chapter 5. The Clash of the Suns. Wars between gods are never simple. Enki and Enlil were the primary antagonists, but they were not the only players. Their sons had inherited their father's conflict and in some ways had intensified it. Marduk, Enki's firstborn, believed his father was too cautious, too willing to negotiate, too hopeful that reason would prevail. Marduk wanted victory, decisive, permanent victory. He wanted not just to defend Eridu, but to destroy Enlil's power entirely. On the other side, Ninurta was proving himself more brutal than his father had been. Where Enlil might have accepted a negotiated surrender, Ninurta wanted total submission. The destruction of Eridu would be a warning to anyone who dared challenge the command structure. Between these two young warriors, compromise was impossible. The battlefield expanded. Fighting spread from Eridu's vicinity to strategic points across Mesopotamia and beyond. The spaceport at Sippar was contested. Control of it meant control of off-world communication and resupply. Marduk attempted a strike against it. Ninurta reinforced it. Skirmishes around the facility caused damage that would take generations to repair. Nippur, the mission control center, became a fortress. Enlil concentrated his forces there, making it the command hub for operations against Eridu. Every attack order, every resource allocation, flowed through Nippur. But the war was not confined to Mesopotamia. The Mahabharata, India's great epic, describes conflicts that echo this same war. Vimanas filling the sky, weapons that released fire like the sun, missiles that pursued their targets, cities annihilated in single blasts. Conventional scholarship dates the Mahabharata's composition to centuries later, treating its wars as mythology or exaggerated human conflicts. But the descriptions match what the Sumerian texts describe happening in this period. The same war, different regions, different names for the same weapons and vehicles. If the Anunnaki presence on Earth was global, then their civil war was global too. The fighting in Mesopotamia was the center, but the edges stretched across continents. Africa became critical to the conflict's logistics. The gold mines were there, the raw materials that justified the entire Earth mission. Whoever controlled African operations controlled the strategic foundation of the war. Nergal, another Anunnaki lord, controlled the southern regions. He was aligned with Enlil, though his loyalty was more practical than ideological. He went with whoever seemed likely to win. When Nergal cut off Eridu's supply lines from Africa, the city began to feel the pressure. Gold was not just currency. Gold was technology. The devices that maintained Eridu's defenses, that powered the Abzu, that enabled everything Enki had built, required gold. Without resupply, Eridu would eventually fail. Not dramatically, but gradually. The shields would weaken. The power systems would degrade. The city that could not be conquered could be starved. Marduk raged at this betrayal. He swore vengeance against Nergal. That feud would echo through mythology for thousands of years, appearing in stories of underworld gods and death lords. But vengeance would have to wait. The immediate crisis demanded immediate solutions, and Enki, for all his brilliance, was running out of options. Marduk deserves closer examination. Because his ambitions shaped the war as much as his father's ideals did. Marduk was Enki's firstborn son, inheritor of his father's intelligence and his faction's leadership. But Marduk was not content to be a scientist or a teacher. He wanted power. Direct, unambiguous power. The kind his uncle Enlil possessed as mission commander. Marduk believed the Anunnaki hierarchy was unjust. He was firstborn of the firstborn. By one reckoning of succession, he should have been next in line after Anu himself. But the rules favored Enlil's line. Political arrangements made long before Earth's settlement determined who would command and who would serve. Marduk accepted his father's cause not only because it was right, but because victory would reshape the hierarchy. With Enlil defeated, Marduk could claim the authority he believed he deserved. This combination of idealism and ambition made Marduk dangerous. He would not seek compromise. He would not accept half measures. He wanted total victory or nothing. His father's caution frustrated him. Enki preferred defense over offense. He believed time and rightness would eventually prevail. Marduk believed in decisive action. When the war came, Marduk was ready. He had prepared military options his father had hoped would never be necessary. He had cultivated alliances among the Anunnaki who resented Enlil's command. The defense of Eridu was Marduk's operation. The counterattacks that bloodied Ninurta's forces were Marduk's strategies. Whatever success the Enki faction achieved was largely due to Marduk's military talent. But Marduk's aggression also escalated the conflict. His attacks on Sippar and Nippur transformed a defensive action into a war of conquest. His ambitions made compromise impossible. In demanding everything, Marduk ensured that nothing would survive intact. Ninurta was everything Marduk was, reflected through Enlil's values rather than Enki's. He was Enlil's champion, the warrior who enforced the command structure, the one who did what needed to be done without hesitation or excessive questioning. The texts describe Ninurta as powerful, fierce, devoted, a son who embodied his father's vision of order maintained through strength. Where Marduk questioned the hierarchy, Ninurta defended it. Where Marduk sought to overturn the rules, Ninurta enforced them. They were mirror images, each convinced of their own righteousness. Ninurta's military campaigns were brutal by design. He believed in making examples, in punishing defiance so thoroughly that others would not dare to follow. The devastation of Eridu's surrounding settlements was not strategic necessity alone. It was message. This is what happens to those who shelter rebels. This is what happens to those who defy command. When his forces failed to breach Eridu itself, Ninurta took the failure personally. His reputation was at stake. His father's authority was at stake. Failure was not an option. The argument for using the 7 weapons was Ninurta's. Better to rule a ruin than serve a traitor. That phrase captures his worldview completely. Order without authority is chaos. Authority without enforcement is weakness. If maintaining order requires destruction, then destruction is justified. This logic has echoed through human history. Every tyrant, every dictator, every authority willing to destroy rather than lose control has made a version of Ninurta's argument. Chapter 6. The Siege of the Abzu. Enlil had learned from his initial failures. Direct assault against Eridu was too costly. The city's defenses were too strong. Ninurta's stormbirds could devastate the surrounding countryside, but they could not breach Eridu's core. So Enlil changed strategy. He would not destroy Eridu. He would strangle it. The rivers that fed the city were diverted. Upstream dams were constructed. The flow of the Euphrates, which Eridu depended upon, was reduced to a trickle. The farmland around the city, already damaged by warfare, was systematically destroyed. Crops were burned. Irrigation systems were wrecked. Anything that could sustain life was eliminated. And the blockade tightened. No supplies entered Eridu. No trade occurred. The sanctuary city became a prison. Inside the walls, conditions deteriorated. The human population, those refugees who had sought Enki's protection, faced the reality of siege. Food was rationed. Water was rationed. The abundance they had known was becoming scarcity. Fear spread. These were people who remembered the Edin, who remembered expulsion and wandering. Now they were trapped in a city that might become their tomb. Enki moved among them, offering reassurance he was not certain he believed himself. He had protected them. He had taught them. He had given them consciousness itself. Now he might have led them to destruction. In the chambers beneath the Abzu, a more precious rationing was occurring. The water of life. The longevity serum that the Anunnaki used to extend their lifespans. Supplies were limited, and they were not being replenished. Without the water of life, even Anunnaki would begin to age at Earth's accelerated rate. The gods would become mortal. Time itself would become an enemy. Enki faced impossible choices. Every day of resistance consumed resources that could not be replaced. Every defensive action drained systems that could not be recharged. He tried diplomacy. Using what communication channels remained, Enki attempted to reach Anu directly. He pleaded his case. Eridu was essential to the mission. The knowledge preserved there, the technologies developed there, the future possibilities represented there must not be destroyed. Destroying Eridu would not solve the problem. It would only end the best hope for Earth's development. The humans Enlil wanted eliminated were the future. Their potential was beyond anything the Anunnaki had anticipated. The message was sent. The frequencies were active. The technology functioned. But no response came. Anu's silence was answer enough. The king would not intervene. The brothers would fight until one prevailed, and whatever was destroyed in the process was acceptable loss. Enki stood in the Abzu, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of his people, watching his city slowly die. The greatest mind among the Anunnaki, and he could not find a way out. The siege continued, and both sides began to contemplate options that should never have been considered. Act 3. The Unleashing of Terror. Chapter 7. The 7 Weapons of Terror. Stalemate is intolerable to commanders who believe they should have already won. Enlil had superior numbers, superior resources, superior logistics. He had isolated Eridu. He had starved its defenders. By any reasonable calculation, victory should have been his. But the city held. Marduk's defenders adapted. The humans proved more resilient than anyone expected, and every day the siege continued was a day Enlil's authority was questioned. If he could not defeat one rebellious city, what did that say about his leadership? What did that say about the command structure he represented? Ninurta was more direct. His losses had been significant. His reputation was at stake, and he was tired of measured, strategic approaches that produced no results. He proposed the unthinkable. The Chamber of Creation was a sealed facility, location known only to senior Anunnaki commanders. It contained technologies that were not meant to be used, weapons that had been brought to Earth as insurance, never intended for deployment. The 7 Weapons of Terror. The Gandiva-class devices. Nuclear or nuclear-equivalent technology capable of destroying entire cities instantly. These were not conventional weapons. They were extinction-level threats. Their use would not just end the conflict, it would change Earth permanently. Enlil hesitated. Even he recognized that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. But Ninurta pressed. The war had already lasted too long. Resources were being consumed. The mission itself was being jeopardized. Better to end it decisively, even if the ending was terrible. Better to rule a ruin, Ninurta argued, than serve a traitor. The phrase would echo through history. It captured something essential about the Enlilite position. Order mattered more than life. Authority mattered more than survival. If Eridu could not be controlled, it should not exist. The codes to unlock the Chamber of Creation required consensus among senior commanders. Enlil had authority, but he needed support. He found it among those who had lost the most. Commanders whose forces had been destroyed over Eridu. Administrators whose plans had been disrupted. Those who had personal reasons to want the conflict ended, whatever the cost. The authorization was given. The weapons were accessed. The countdown to catastrophe had begun. But not everyone agreed. The Agigi, the working-class Anunnaki who had sparked this conflict by rebelling against the mines, now rebelled again. They lived on Earth. They had adapted to its rhythms, its seasons, its life. Some had formed relationships with humans. They had children who were neither purely Anunnaki nor purely human. The weapons being proposed would destroy the world they had made their home. The fallout would kill their families. The contamination would make Earth uninhabitable. This was not what they had signed up for. This was not what service to the command structure was supposed to mean. The second Ijiji rebellion was quieter than the first. No burning of tools, no surrounding of commanders, just refusal. Pilots who would not fly certain missions, technicians who experienced equipment failures at critical moments. The rebellion was not enough to stop the weapons deployment, but it slowed preparations. It created chaos and logistics. It gave warning to those who might otherwise have been caught unaware. Some Ijiji actively defected. They brought intelligence to Enki's faction. They sabotaged what they could. They tried to prevent the worst, even while knowing they probably could not succeed. Enki learned what was coming. The weapons that could not be stopped by any shield. The destruction that could not be survived by any defense. He had days, perhaps hours, to prepare for the end of everything he had built. Chapter 8. Enki's Last Stand. When you know the end is coming, what do you do with the time remaining? Enki had spent millennia building Eridu, creating humanity, teaching civilization. All of it was about to be erased. The question was whether anything could be saved. He emerged from the Abzu wearing something the humans had never seen, a technological exoskeleton. Armor that enhanced strength, protected against weapons, interfaced directly with his biological systems. This was not the gentle teacher they knew. This was the warrior that Enki had never wanted to become. The aspect of himself he had hoped would never be necessary. He stood at the gates of the great ziggurat, looking out over his city. The humans gathered below. The Anunnaki loyalists stood with them. Everyone knew this was the end of something. Enki spoke. He did not offer false hope. He did not promise victory. He admitted what they already knew. Militarily, they could not win. The weapons coming for them could not be stopped by any defense Eridu possessed. But military victory was not the only kind of victory. Life persists. Knowledge survives. What is seeded correctly grows again, even after devastation. The war might be lost, but the future was still contested. Enki revealed his plan, what he called Operation Seed. The knowledge preserved in Eridu, the sum of Anunnaki understanding, could not be protected in physical form. Buildings could be destroyed. Archives could be burned. Data crystals could be shattered. But there was another storage medium. One that was self-replicating. One that would persist as long as life itself persisted. Human DNA. The genetic code contained vast regions that conventional science could not explain. So-called junk DNA that seemed to serve no biological function. Enki had designed it that way. Those regions were storage space, capacity for information that would be passed from generation to generation, copied with every reproduction, preserved indefinitely. Now Enki would use that capacity. He would encode what could not be physically preserved into the genetic structure of humanity itself. The full archive could not be transferred. There was not enough time, and DNA storage had limits. But the essential knowledge, the keys that would allow reconstruction, the seeds that could grow into recovered understanding, those could be encoded. While defenders held what lines they could, Enki worked in the Abzu. The encoding process was delicate. Precise genetic sequences had to be introduced without disrupting biological function. The information had to be distributed across multiple lineages to ensure survival. Selected humans underwent the modification. They did not fully understand what was being done to them. They understood only that Enki was giving them something important, something that might matter after everything else was lost. But encoding was not enough. Backups required diversity. While the genetic encoding proceeded, other preparations were being made. Physical archives were being buried. The Hall of Records, as later traditions would call it, was being sealed beneath the earth. Locations scattered across the planet, Egypt, India, the Americas, places where the blast might not reach, places where future generations might search. If even one archive survived, if even one encoded lineage persisted, the knowledge could be recovered. Eridu would fall, but what Eridu represented might live on. Enki worked through the final hours. The teacher had become the preserver. The creator had become the gardener, planting seeds in soil that was about to be poisoned. He did not know if it would be enough. He only knew it was all he could do. Chapter 9. The Evil Wind. The Sinai Peninsula was not a random target. The spaceport there was the primary connection between Earth and the Anunnaki homeworld. Control it, and you controlled who could leave and who must stay. Control it, and you controlled the entire planet. Marduk had made moves toward the Sinai. His forces had contested the region. The spaceport's neutrality was no longer certain. Enlil's response was to ensure no one would have it. The 5 cities of the plain, the settlements that supported the spaceport's operations, were the secondary targets. Their elimination would remove any possibility of the facility being reconstructed. Biblical tradition remembers these cities as Sodom and Gomorrah and their sisters. The story filtered through thousands of years of retelling, becoming a moral tale about divine punishment for wickedness. But the original was not about morality. It was about strategy. The cities died not because they were sinful, but because they were useful to the wrong side. The weapons were deployed. The Lament for Ur, one of the most haunting documents from ancient Mesopotamia, describes what happened in terms that require no interpretation. A storm that was not a storm. A wind that was not wind. Something that killed without wounds. Something that could not be fought or fled. The blasts themselves were devastating. Columns of fire that rose to the heavens, shock waves that flattened structures for miles around, temperatures that vaporized stone. But the blasts were not the worst of it. What followed was the evil wind, a cloud of death, invisible, unstoppable, spreading from the blast sites in whatever direction the atmospheric currents carried it. The Lament describes it. The storm that was not a storm moved toward Sumer. It did not announce itself with thunder. It came silently, bringing death without battle. Cities that were not targets became victims. People who had taken no side in the conflict died in their homes, in their streets, in their temples. The symptoms were terrible. Bleeding that would not stop. Organs failing without external injury. Hair and teeth falling out. Mothers unable to nurse children. Children born malformed or dying within hours. We know these symptoms. We have seen them at Hiroshima, at Chernobyl, at every site where radiation has been released in quantity. The evil wind was fallout. Radioactive contamination spread by atmospheric circulation, killing everything it touched for hundreds of miles beyond the original targets. Eridu was not directly struck. The weapons were aimed at the Sinai and the southern regions, far from Enki's city. Perhaps some consideration for Eridu's significance remained. Perhaps the planners simply thought starving it was sufficient. But the evil wind did not respect such calculations. The prevailing winds carried the contamination northward, across Mesopotamia, across the cradle of civilization itself. Eridu's shields could stop weapons. They could not stop poison air. The cloud reached the sanctuary city. It seeped through every defense. It found every living thing within. The humans died first. Their shorter lifespans made them more vulnerable to radiation's effects. They sickened. They weakened. They fell. The Anunnaki lasted longer, their enhanced biology providing some resistance. But even they could not survive indefinitely. Even they began to feel the accumulating damage. And Enki could only watch as everything he had built, everyone he had protected, succumbed to a poison he could not cure. The Sumerian lament texts are among the most powerful primary sources for the catastrophe. The lament for describes destruction so complete that readers thousands of years later can still feel its weight. The wild bull of the heavens was brought low. The people mourn. The city that was is no more. The house that was is dust. In the streets where the people walked, corpses lie abandoned. In the squares where the children played, silence reigns. These words were written by survivors, by those who saw what happened and needed to record it. The storm that came was not natural. It was sent. The wind that killed was not wind. It was weapon. The lament for Eridu is equally devastating. The city of the first kingship, the city where civilization began, has fallen. Its walls that touched heaven lie broken. Its gates that welcomed all stand shattered. The Abzu, the sacred place of creation, is silent. No voice speaks in its chambers. No wisdom flows from its depths. The people who sought knowledge there are scattered. The learning that was shared there is forgotten. The future that was promised there is lost. These were not mythological compositions. They were funeral rites for dead cities. Act 4. The Silent City and the Legacy. Chapter 10. The Death of Eridu. The evacuation began when the cloud's approach became certain. Anunnaki ships lifted from every functional landing site. Those who could leave did. The priority was survival. The priority was getting beyond the contaminated zone. Orbit was safe. The homeworld was safe. Earth was being abandoned, at least temporarily, until the radiation dispersed. But not everyone could leave. There were not enough ships for everyone. The humans certainly could not go. Most of the Anunnaki support staff could not go. The evacuation was for leadership, for essential personnel, for those whose survival was deemed necessary. The others were left to face the evil wind alone. Enki refused to evacuate. His loyalists urged him to leave. His survival mattered. His knowledge mattered. What purpose would be served by dying with the city he could no longer save? But Enki would not go. Instead, he descended into the Abzu, the laboratories that had created humanity, the archives that held the accumulated knowledge of his people, the heart of everything Eridu represented. He began the sealing process. If he could not save the city, he could preserve what it contained. The chambers of the Abzu were engineered to survive catastrophe. Properly sealed, they might remain intact for centuries, for millennia. Enki moved through his life's work, ensuring each section was secure. The genetic records, the astronomical data, the technological specifications, the history of everything his people had accomplished on Earth. Sealed, locked, buried against a time when someone might return to find them. Above him, the city was dying. The humans who could not flee huddled in whatever shelter they could find. The contamination found them anyway. It found everyone. The streets filled with bodies, not the violent death of battle, but the quiet death of poison. People simply stopped moving. They lay where they fell, and no one was left to move them. The lament texts that survive describe scenes that those who lived through them could barely articulate. The ox fallen in its stall, the sheep dead in its fold, the mother unable to protect her children, the elder watching the young die first. No enemy to fight, no defense possible. Just death, silent and total, spreading through the city like a tide that would not recede. Enki emerged from the Abzu when the sealing was complete. The city he saw was not the city he had built. It was a necropolis, a ghost place where nothing living remained. The texts say he wept. The God who created humanity, the teacher who gave them consciousness, the protector who offered them sanctuary, standing in the ruins of his greatest work, weeping for what had been lost. Then he left. One of the last ships lifted from Eridu's platform, carrying Enki toward orbit. Behind him, the city settled into silence. The wind blew through empty streets. The sun set on a world that would never be the same. Eridu was dead. The first city of the star gods had become a tomb. Chapter 11. The Aftermath and the Amnesia. The evil wind dispersed eventually. Radiation decays. Contamination spreads until it is no longer concentrated enough to kill quickly. But quickly is a relative term. The civilization that had existed in Mesopotamia was essentially erased. Not every person died, but enough died that organized society collapsed. The survivors faced a world they no longer understood. The infrastructure was dead. The cities were silent. The knowledge that had made everything work was gone, along with those who possessed it. What followed was regression. The survivors, unable to maintain what they had inherited, reverted to simpler forms of existence. The Stone Age returned to lands that had known bronze and gold. Generations passed. Memory faded. What had been became what was told, and what was told became uncertain. The Anunnaki who had fled to orbit eventually returned. They found devastation beyond what they had anticipated. The war had been won, technically. Eridu was destroyed. Marduk's faction was scattered. The command structure under Enlil was intact. But victory felt hollow. The planet they had come to exploit was damaged. The workforce they had created was largely dead. The infrastructure they had built would take generations to rebuild. And they had to decide what came next. Enlil and Enki, the brothers whose conflict had caused this catastrophe, reached an agreement. Not reconciliation, the hatred was too deep for that, but practical accommodation. The weapons would never be used again. Whatever their differences, neither would authorize deployment of the 7 weapons of terror. The cost was too obvious now. The consequences were too permanent. And humanity must not remember. This was perhaps the most significant decision of all. The humans who survived, and their descendants, could not be allowed to know what had really happened. Knowledge was dangerous. Understanding was dangerous. A species that knew it had been created, that knew it had been fought over, that knew its gods were mortal and fallible and capable of terrible destruction. That species might become uncontrollable. Better to let them forget. Better to let the memories fade into legend. Better to build new narratives that served new purposes. The cover-up began. The ruins were buried. New construction was placed over old. Cities were built on foundations whose origins were obscured. History was rewritten. What had been recent became ancient. What had been known became mythical. The gods who had walked among humans became distant figures in stories told around fires. Writing itself was controlled. The new scripts, when they emerged, encoded only approved narratives. The full truth was restricted to initiates, to priesthoods that served the new order. It worked. Within generations, humanity had forgotten the high-tech past. They remembered gods, but gods who had always been divine. They remembered floods and fires, but as supernatural punishments, not military actions. The Anunnaki became mythology. Their civil war became a cosmic battle between good and evil. The radioactive devastation became divine judgment on wicked cities. Eridu itself became legend. The first city, the place where kingship descended from heaven, a name in ancient texts, not a memory of what had actually stood there. The amnesia was complete. Humanity started over, believing it had always been starting over. Chapter 12. The Awakening. Thousands of years have passed since the fall of Eridu, but secrets do not stay buried forever. Consider Mohenjo-Daro. This ancient city in the Indus Valley shows evidence of sudden destruction. Skeletons in the streets, unburied, lying in poses of sudden death. And those skeletons, when tested, show radiation levels far above normal. Archaeological explanation? There is none. Conventional history has no answer for radioactive skeletons in a Bronze Age city. Consider the Libyan desert glass. Scattered across the Sahara, thousands of square kilometers of sand fused into glass. The temperatures required to create this glass exceed anything nature normally produces. A meteor impact, perhaps? But there is no crater, no evidence of collision, just glass, as if something impossibly hot had scorched the desert floor. Consider the underground cities of Cappadocia. Tunnels and chambers carved from solid rock, capable of sheltering tens of thousands of people. Why would ancient people need to hide underground? What were they hiding from? The official explanation is always defense against invaders. But the depth of these tunnels, the sophistication of their ventilation, suggests something more. Suggests shelter against something surface fortifications could not stop. Consider human DNA. The genome contains vast regions of unknown function, so-called junk DNA that seems to serve no biological purpose. But absence of understood purpose is not absence of purpose. These regions have been preserved through millions of years of evolution. They survive because something ensures their survival. If Enki encoded information in human DNA, it would look exactly like this. Sequences that persist. Information waiting to be decoded. The technology to read these sequences is developing rapidly. Artificial intelligence can find patterns humans miss. The day when those sequences can be decoded is approaching. What will we find there? What message did Enki leave for the children he created and then had to abandon? Perhaps a warning. Perhaps instructions. Perhaps simply the truth about who we are and where we came from. Whatever it is, it has been waiting for thousands of years. Waiting for us to develop enough to receive it. Waiting for the amnesia to finally break. The search for Enki's library is not metaphor. It is the ultimate investigation. Somewhere, the physical archives may still exist, buried in the Egyptian desert, hidden beneath the Indian subcontinent, sealed in chambers not yet discovered. And within every human, the genetic archive definitely exists. The technology to read it is developing. The decoding may be approaching. Enki lost the battle for Eridu, but he won the war for humanity. We are still here. His codes are inside us. The story of Eridu is not ancient history. It is present context. If what the texts describe is accurate, then we are descendants of an experiment, created for a purpose, modified for consciousness, caught between factions whose conflict shaped our earliest existence. That is a difficult truth to absorb. It contradicts comfortable narratives about human uniqueness. It challenges religious frameworks that place us at the center of divine attention. But consider what it also offers. If Enki's account is true, then we were worth fighting for. The Creator who gave us consciousness thought we deserved to survive. He risked everything to preserve what we might become. That is not a small thing. In a universe that often seems indifferent, the idea that someone cared enough to plant seeds for our future is meaningful. The technologies we are developing mirror what the texts describe. Genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, energy weapons, the ability to reshape life itself. We are approaching a threshold that the Anunnaki crossed long before us. The threshold where technology can either elevate a species or destroy it. The war between Enlil and Enki was fought with weapons that devastated a planet. We are developing similar capabilities. The question is whether we will use them similarly. History, if the texts are accurate, is not just past. It is pattern. The conflicts that tore the Anunnaki apart are the same conflicts we face. Control versus freedom. Order versus creativity. Fear versus faith in potential. The story of Eridu ended in catastrophe because neither side could find a way to compromise. Both were certain they were right. Both were willing to destroy rather than yield. We see the same dynamics in our world. Absolute certainties colliding. Sides that cannot communicate. Escalation toward consequences no one actually wants. Perhaps the point of knowing this history is recognizing the pattern, seeing where it leads, choosing to break the cycle instead of repeating it. The parallel traditions across cultures confirm what the Sumerian texts describe. The biblical Eden parallels the Sumerian Eden precisely. A protected garden, a tree of knowledge. Expulsion after obtaining forbidden understanding. The Genesis flood matches Sumerian texts almost exactly. warning to a chosen individual, construction of a vessel, survival and repopulation, Noah, Utnapishtim, Ziusudra, different names for the same figure in different traditions. The Greek Titans match the Anunnaki, powerful beings preceding current gods. Conflict between generations. Imprisonment after defeat. Egyptian Neteru, Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha. Chinese celestial emperors, Hindu devas and asuras. Each preserves elements of the same underlying narrative. These traditions developed independently, separated by oceans and millennia. They should be unique. They should reflect local concerns. Instead, they reflect a common source, a memory fractured and filtered through countless retellings of events that actually happened to the ancestors of all human cultures. The evidence continues to accumulate. The same stars watched Eridu rise and fall. They watched the Anunnaki come and go. They watch us now. And we are beginning to watch them back, with instruments that would have seemed miraculous to the ancients. The patterns we have traced tonight, from Eridu to the evil wind to the genetic encoding, suggest something larger than mythology. They suggest a history that has been forgotten, waiting to be remembered. And there is more to examine. The questions this raises extend beyond the main narrative we have followed. There are characters and evidence we have not fully explored. The supporting figures whose choices enabled or prevented outcomes. The physical traces that remain in unexpected places. In the genetic archives and the buried chambers and the patterns that repeat across cultures, details await examination. Let us look more closely at the figures who have remained in the background of our story. Their decisions shaped the war's outcome in ways that the main players did not anticipate. Their perspectives reveal dimensions of the conflict that we have not yet considered. But their story is finally being told again. The Agigi deserve closer attention. Their choices shaped outcomes that the major figures did not anticipate. The Agigi were working-class Anunnaki, technicians, pilots, maintenance workers, those who kept the systems running while the elite commanded. Their first rebellion, the one that prompted the creation of humanity, was about labor conditions. They would not be exploited indefinitely. They demanded relief, or they would abandon the mission entirely. That rebellion succeeded. Humanity was created. The Igigi were relieved of the worst labor. But they remained on Earth. They adapted to its rhythms. Some came to prefer Earth to their distant homeland. During the war, the Igigi found themselves caught between factions that did not represent their interests. Enlil saw them as subordinates who should obey without question. Enki appreciated their technical skills, but was focused on his own projects. Neither side really considered what the Igigi wanted. What the Igigi wanted was to live, to continue the lives they had built on Earth, to raise the families some of them had started. The relationships between Igigi and human women are documented in multiple traditions. The Book of Enoch calls them watchers. The Genesis speaks of sons of God taking daughters of men. These were not metaphors. They were descriptions of biological reality. Anunnaki males forming bonds with human females. Children being born who were neither purely one nor the other. The Nephilim, the giants, the heroes of old. Different traditions, same phenomenon. When the 7 weapons were proposed, the Igigi understood what it meant. The fallout would not distinguish between factions. It would kill their families. It would destroy their homes. They had seen what the weapons could do. They knew the contamination would spread. They understood that authorizing deployment meant accepting the death of everything they had built on Earth. The second Ijiji rebellion was quieter than the first. No dramatic confrontations, no burning of tools, just refusal. Pilots who developed equipment problems at critical moments. Technicians whose repairs took longer than expected. Logistics that somehow failed to deliver. Not enough to stop the weapons deployment. The senior commanders had the codes. They had the authority. They could deploy without Ijiji cooperation. But the delays mattered. The warnings that reached Enki came through Ijiji channels. The time he had to prepare his countermeasures was bought by Ijiji resistance. Some Ijiji actively defected. They brought intelligence to Enki's faction. They helped with evacuations. They sabotaged what they could. These were not heroes in the epic sense. They were workers who refused to participate in the destruction of their own lives. They were fathers who would not bomb their own children. Their rebellion failed to prevent catastrophe, but it bought time. It saved lives. It planted seeds that might grow later. The Igigi who survived the war scattered. Some remained on Earth, hiding among the populations they had helped create. Some fled to the outer stations. Some simply disappeared. Their descendants, if the traditions are accurate, carry both bloodlines. Anunnaki capability in human form. The potential that Enki saw manifested in hybrid lineages. When we speak of awakening, of encoded potential, the Igigi contribution cannot be ignored. They added diversity to the genetic pool. They ensured that what Enki planted would have multiple chances to grow. The daughters of men deserve their own attention, because they were not passive in this story. The human women who formed bonds with the Igigi were choosing something. They were reaching beyond their designated place. They were claiming connection with beings who were supposed to be unreachably above them. The texts describe these women as beautiful, as desirable. But beauty is not passive. The women who attracted Igigi's attention were doing something that made them visible. Perhaps they were the curious ones, the ones who asked questions, the ones who approached the sky beings instead of hiding from them. Perhaps they saw opportunity. Connection with an Igigi meant access to knowledge, to protection, to possibilities beyond ordinary human life. Whatever their motivations, they made choices. They accepted relationships that their communities might have condemned. They bore children who were different from everyone around them. The children of these unions were remarkable, larger, stronger, longer lived than ordinary humans, possessing capabilities that seemed almost divine. The heroes of ancient mythology may be memories of these hybrids. Gilgamesh, 2/3 god and 1/3 human. Hercules, son of Zeus. Achilles, born of a goddess. These stories remember something real, a generation of beings who bridged the gap between fully human and fully Anunnaki. The flood, according to some traditions, was intended to eliminate these hybrids. They were too powerful, too unpredictable. They threatened the careful control that Enlil wanted to maintain. But some survived. The bloodlines continued. The hybrid potential passed from generation to generation, diluted but not eliminated. When Enki encoded information in human DNA, he may have specifically targeted these hybrid lineages. Their genetics were already enhanced. They were already bridges between species. The awakening that the prophecies describe may depend on these bloodlines. The activation of dormant potential may require the hybrid heritage that the daughters of men helped create. Let us examine the evidence more systematically, because claims this extraordinary require evidence equally extraordinary. The textual evidence begins with the Sumerian king list. This document, preserved on multiple clay tablets, lists rulers stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. The early kings ruled for spans of time that seem impossible. Tens of thousands of years for a single reign. Conventional scholarship dismisses these early entries as mythological. The numbers must be symbolic. The early kings must be legendary figures, not historical ones. But the same document lists later kings whose reigns can be verified against other records. These later entries are demonstrably historical. The document is not entirely fiction. So which interpretation is correct? Is the early section purely symbolic, while the later section is historical? Or does the document preserve a continuous record, with the early section describing beings whose lifespans were genuinely different from ours? If the Anunnaki were real, if they lived for the spans the texts describe, then the king list is not mythology. It is history recorded by beings who measured time differently than we do. The creation texts provide another category of evidence. The Atrahasis epic describes the creation of humanity in startling detail. The mixing of divine blood with clay. The use of birth goddesses as surrogate wombs. The multiple attempts before success. This matches genetic engineering precisely. DNA extracted from one source, combined with genetic material from another, implanted in host organisms for gestation, trial and error until a viable hybrid emerges. The Enuma Elish provides cosmological context, the arrival of a wandering celestial body, conflict among the gods, the formation of Earth from cosmic debris. Modern astronomy has identified objects that match the description of Nibiru, Planet X, as it is sometimes called. A large body in a highly elliptical orbit that periodically approaches the inner solar system. Not proven, but not impossible either. The search continues. The archaeological evidence is equally compelling. Eridu's excavation revealed something that troubled the excavators. The oldest levels showed no developmental progression. Normally, archaeological sites show gradual development. Simple structures give way to complex ones. Primitive techniques evolve into sophisticated ones. You can trace the learning curve. Eridu did not show this. The sophistication was there from the beginning, as if the builders arrived already knowing exactly what they were doing. The same pattern appears at other sites, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Pumapunku in Bolivia, sites that seem to appear fully formed without the expected precursor development. Either our archaeological models are wrong, or these sites were built by people who already possessed advanced knowledge. People who did not need to develop because they had already developed elsewhere. The sudden emergence of civilization remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. For millions of years, humans and our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. Then, suddenly, within a few thousand years, agriculture appeared, Cities appeared. Writing appeared. Complex social organization appeared. This happened in multiple locations nearly simultaneously. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China. Each developed agriculture and cities within a relatively narrow time frame. Conventional explanation suggests independent invention. Multiple populations figured out the same things at roughly the same time, coincidentally. Alternative explanation suggests common source. Multiple populations received the same knowledge from a single originating culture, which is why development was simultaneous. The Anunnaki hypothesis provides that common source. They established colonies across the globe. They taught the same techniques in each location. The apparent simultaneity reflects coordinated development, not coincidence. The physical evidence of catastrophe is distributed globally. Vitrified forts in Scotland and Ireland. Stone walls fused into glass by temperatures no conventional fire could achieve. What burned hot enough to vitrify stone in prehistoric Scotland? Tektites scattered across continents. Glass formed by extreme heat, found in locations that show no evidence of volcanic activity or meteor impact. The Libyan desert glass we mentioned earlier. Silicon dioxide fused into gem-quality glass across thousands of square kilometers. No crater, no explanation. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in the Indus Valley. Cities abandoned suddenly, skeletons in streets unburied, radiation levels that should not exist in Bronze Age contexts. Each of these anomalies has been individually explained away. Coincidence, contamination, misreading of evidence. But taken together, they form a pattern of extreme heat events, a pattern of sudden destruction, a pattern consistent with the weapons the texts describe. The genetic evidence deserves detailed examination. Human DNA contains approximately 3 billion base pairs. Only about 2% of these code for proteins. The remaining 98% was labeled junk DNA because its function was unknown. But junk is a description of our ignorance, not the DNA's function. These non-coding regions have been preserved through millions of years of evolution. Natural selection should eliminate useless sequences over time. But these persist. Generation after generation, they are faithfully copied. Something is maintaining them. Something considers them important enough to preserve. Recent research has identified regulatory functions for some of this so-called junk. These sequences control when genes turn on and off. They influence how genetic information is expressed. But regulation does not account for all of it. Vast regions remain mysterious. Their function, if any, is unknown. If Enki encoded information in human DNA, it would look exactly like this. Sequences that persist without apparent function. Information waiting for the right decoder. The human genome also contains sequences that appear nowhere else on Earth. Genes that seem to have no evolutionary precursor. Sequences that arrived suddenly in the human lineage without the gradual accumulation normal evolution produces. Conventional explanation attributes these to viral insertion. Viruses occasionally incorporate their genetic material into host genomes. Over time, these insertions accumulate. But viral insertion is random. It produces scattered, recognizable patterns. What we see in human DNA includes organized sequences that do not match viral signatures. Something else put them there. something that was not random. The technology to fully sequence and analyze these regions is developing rapidly. Artificial intelligence can find patterns in data that humans cannot process. Machine learning algorithms can identify relationships across billions of base pairs. We are approaching the capability to actually read what might be encoded in our genomes. The day may come within our lifetimes when the sequences that Enki embedded can finally be decoded. When the message he left can finally be read, what will we find there? Perhaps nothing unusual. Perhaps the sequences really are junk, preserved by accident rather than design. Or perhaps we will find exactly what the texts suggest. A library written in the language of life itself. Instructions for the children of Enki. A gift from the Father who could not stay, but refused to abandon his creation entirely. Consciousness itself may hold the key to everything. The gift that Enki gave that made humans different from the Lulu prototypes was consciousness, self-awareness, the ability to know that we know. This gift has never been adequately explained by conventional science. We understand neurons, we understand brain chemistry, we can map neural pathways and identify which regions activate during which activities. But we cannot explain consciousness itself. We cannot explain why there is subjective experience, why there is something it feels like to be you, rather than just information processing happening in darkness. This is called the hard problem of consciousness. It has resisted solution despite decades of intensive research. Materialist explanations keep pushing the question back. Consciousness emerges from complexity. But why? How does subjective experience emerge from objective processes? No answer has been found because perhaps the question is wrong. Perhaps consciousness does not emerge from matter. Perhaps it is fundamental, like space or time or energy. If consciousness was engineered rather than evolved, the mystery takes a different shape. An engineer understands what they are building. Enki, if he gave us consciousness, understood what consciousness is. He possessed that knowledge. That knowledge may be part of what was encoded, not just information about history or technology, but understanding of consciousness itself. What is awareness? How does subjective experience work? What are the mechanics of the self? These questions have occupied philosophers for millennia without resolution. But the answers may exist, encoded in the very beings who ask the questions. The awakening that prophecies describe may be the activation of this understanding, not just remembering history, but comprehending the nature of our own awareness. Imagine knowing, truly knowing, what consciousness is, how it works, what it is capable of. Such knowledge would change everything. It would transform philosophy, psychology, medicine, spirituality. It would answer questions that have haunted humanity since the first human looked up at the stars and wondered. This may be Enki's ultimate gift, not just awareness, but understanding of awareness. The key to our own nature, waiting to be discovered. The question that haunts all of this is whether the Anunnaki will return. The texts describe their departure, but not their permanent absence. They withdrew from direct involvement, but withdrawal is not abandonment. If beings live for hundreds of thousands of years, their sense of time differs radically from ours. What seems like ancient history to us, the fall of Eridu, may feel recent to them. The 4,000 years since the catastrophe may be a brief interval in their reckoning. Consider the implications. If the Anunnaki still exist, they have watched everything. The rise and fall of empires, the development of technology, the wars and achievements and disasters of human history. They have seen us develop capabilities that mirror their own. Nuclear weapons, genetic engineering, space travel. We are approaching a threshold they crossed long ago. What do they think of our progress? Are they pleased that Enki's experiment succeeded? That the beings he created have grown beyond anyone's expectations? Or are they concerned? Do they see patterns repeating? Do they watch us developing the same weapons that devastated their civilization, and wonder if we will make the same mistakes? The ancient prophecies across cultures speak of return, a time when the gods come back, when what was hidden is revealed, when humanity's relationship with its creators is renewed. These prophecies are remarkably consistent. The specifics differ, but the core concept repeats. A period of upheaval followed by transformation, an ending that is also a beginning. We may be approaching that time. The convergence of technological capability, encoded awakening, and prophetic expectation may not be coincidence. The return, if it comes, will not be simple. The Anunnaki themselves were divided. Enki's faction and Enlil's faction had fundamentally different views of humanity's proper role. Which faction returns matters enormously. Are we to be welcomed as successful offspring, or corrected as dangerous mistakes? Perhaps that is the test we face now. Perhaps what we do with our developing capabilities, how we handle our conflicts, whether we repeat the patterns that destroyed Eridu or find new paths, will determine how we are received. The judgment, if judgment there is, has not yet been rendered. We are still writing the record that will be evaluated. What do we do with this knowledge? If the story of Eridu is true, it changes our understanding of ourselves fundamentally. We are not accidents of evolution. We are designed beings with designed potential. That is both empowering and humbling. Empowering because it suggests we have capabilities we have not yet accessed. Humbling because it suggests we have responsibilities we have not yet acknowledged. The practical implications are significant. If information is encoded in our DNA, we should be looking for it, not as fringe science, but as serious research. The tools exist, the computing power exists. What is lacking is institutional willingness to pursue questions that challenge established narratives. If the Anunnaki archives exist, we should be searching for them, not with the assumption that they are myth, but with the possibility that they are real. The locations suggested by various traditions, under the Sphinx, in the Yucatan, beneath the Himalayas, deserve serious investigation. If consciousness holds keys to our nature, we should be studying it more intensively. Not just brain mapping, but deep inquiry into the nature of awareness itself. The answers may lie within our own experience if we know how to look. But beyond practical actions, there is something more fundamental. The story of Eridu is a story about conflict, about certainty destroying what compromise might have preserved, about factions so convinced of their rightness that they could not find common ground. We face similar conflicts, political divisions that prevent cooperation, ideological certainties that prevent communication, escalation that threatens consequences no one actually wants. Perhaps the most important thing we can learn from Eridu is what not to do. how not to handle fundamental disagreements, how not to let conflict spiral beyond control. The Anunnaki were more technologically advanced than we are. They were older, more experienced, more knowledgeable. And they still destroyed their greatest achievement because they could not find a way to live with their differences. We are younger, less experienced, less knowledgeable. But we have something they lacked. We have their example. We have the record of what happens when intelligent beings let conflict consume them. That knowledge is a gift. A bitter gift purchased with the destruction of Eridu and the death of countless beings. But a gift, nonetheless. What we do with it is up to us. Look at the world around you. See the patterns. Nations armed with weapons that could end civilization. Leaders convinced of their own righteousness. Populations divided into factions that cannot communicate. The same dynamics that destroyed Eridu are playing out again. The names are different. The technology is different. But the underlying pattern is identical. Certainty versus certainty. Control versus freedom. Order versus creativity. The argument that destruction is preferable to compromise. We have developed weapons that the Anunnaki would recognize. Nuclear arsenals capable of making Earth uninhabitable. Biological capabilities that could reshape or eliminate species. Artificial intelligence that might exceed our ability to control. We are approaching their level. We are facing their choices. We will produce their outcomes unless we choose differently. The story of Eridu is not ancient history. It is warning. It is instruction. It is a map of the territory we are entering. The question is whether we will read the map or repeat the journey blindly. There are reasons for hope. We have knowledge they lacked. We know how their conflict ended. We can see the consequences of their choices laid out across thousands of years of human struggle. We have capabilities they lacked. Global communication, information sharing, the ability to coordinate across distances that once seemed impossible. We have something else, the very consciousness that Enki gave us, the ability to reflect, to imagine alternatives, to choose paths that pure instinct would not select. Consciousness is not just awareness. It is the capacity to transcend programming, to see patterns and refuse them, to imagine better and work toward it. This may be what Enki saw when he upgraded the Lulu design. Not just workers who could think, but beings who could grow, who could exceed their original parameters, who could become more than they were created to be. We have that potential. Every tradition that remembers the gods also remembers that we are meant to become something greater. The prophecies of awakening are prophecies of actualization, of potential becoming real. The story of Eridu does not have to be our story. We can write a different ending. The patterns we have identified suggest both warning and possibility. Warning because we face similar choices. Possibility because we have their example to learn from, who remember the friend they lost and the children they created. They may be watching us now, wondering what we will become, hoping perhaps that we will find the wisdom they could not find. Or they may have moved on. Other worlds, other projects, Earth a distant memory, a failed experiment noted and filed away. We cannot know. The silence from the sky does not tell us which interpretation is correct. but we can choose how to live with the uncertainty. We can let the mystery paralyze us. Let the questions we cannot answer prevent us from acting on the questions we can address. Or we can embrace the uncertainty, accept that some questions will remain open, and focus on the choices that are clearly ours to make. How do we treat each other? How do we handle our conflicts? How do we use the capabilities we are developing? These questions do not require answers from the sky. They require answers from us, in the choices we make each day. The story of Eridu matters not because it tells us what to believe, but because it shows us what to avoid. The path of certainty, of escalation, of destruction rather than compromise. That path has already been walked. We know where it leads. We can walk a different path. We can find ways to live with our differences that do not require destroying what we disagree about. That is the lesson. That is the gift that comes wrapped in tragedy. The knowledge that there is a better way, even if finding it is difficult. Carry that knowledge forward, into your own certainties, into your own conflicts, into your own choices. The gods who created us failed to find peace with each other. Perhaps their children can succeed where they failed. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps that is why Enki gave us consciousness, not just to survive, but to transcend. To find the solutions that eluded even those who made us. That is a worthy aspiration. That is a purpose worth pursuing. That is a story worth living. The city of the star gods is silent now. Its stones are buried. Its people are dust. But you know it now. You carry it now. And what you do with that knowledge matters more than what happened 4,000 years ago. The past is fixed. The future is not, and you are the bridge between them. But before we close, there are figures in this story who deserve closer attention. Their choices shaped outcomes in ways we have not yet fully explored. Nergal's role in the war deserves attention, because his choices illustrate how pragmatism can enable catastrophe. Nergal was not a committed ideologue like Ninurta. He did not burn with desire to destroy Eridu or subjugate humanity. He was practical. He controlled the African operations, the gold mines, the refineries, the logistics that made the entire Earth mission possible. When the war began, Nergal had to choose sides. Not choosing was not an option. Both factions would demand his resources, his infrastructure, his support. He calculated. Enlil controlled more territory. Enlil had more forces. Enlil was more likely to win. So Nergal aligned with Enlil, not out of conviction, but out of prudence. When he cut off Eridu's supply lines, he was not acting from hatred. He was acting from assessment. Eridu would fall eventually. Better to be on the winning side when it did. This calculation made the siege possible. Without African gold, Eridu's systems began to fail. Without resupply, the defenders began to weaken. Nergal's pragmatism enabled the strangulation of Eridu more effectively than Ninurta's attacks. When the 7 weapons were proposed, Nergal did not object. The weapons would not be used in Africa. His operations would survive. His position would be secured by victory. He did not consider, or did not care, what the fallout would do to the wider world. His calculation was local. His interests were narrow. This is how catastrophe often happens, not through malice alone, but through narrow calculation that ignores wider consequences. Nergal was not evil. He was limited. He saw his interests clearly, but could not see, or would not see, how those interests connected to everyone else's. Later traditions would associate Nergal with the underworld, with death, with plague. These associations may be memory. The being whose pragmatism enabled weapons that killed countless beings. The Lord whose calculations contributed to devastation he did not prevent. Mythology remembers actions, even when it forgets explanations. Nergal became a death god because his choices brought death, regardless of his intentions. Anu's silence throughout the conflict raises questions that the texts do not fully answer. He was the supreme authority. His word was law. He could have intervened at any point. He could have commanded both sons to stand down. He could have negotiated a settlement. He chose not to. Some interpret this as wisdom. A ruler who intervenes in every dispute creates dependency. Better to let subordinates resolve their own conflicts. Better to maintain distance and intervene only when absolutely necessary. Others interpret this as calculation. Anu benefited from his sons' rivalry. As long as they competed with each other, neither could challenge his authority. Their conflict kept both weakened. Still others interpret this as indifference. Perhaps Anu was simply too distant, too occupied with other concerns, to involve himself in Earth's affairs. Perhaps the entire Earth mission was a minor matter in the larger context of his responsibilities. The texts do not say. They record his silence without explaining it. But the effect of that silence is clear. Without intervention from above, the conflict escalated. Without a higher authority to impose settlement, neither side could accept compromise without appearing weak. Enlil's position was that he was enforcing the command structure. To back down would be to admit that defiance could succeed. Enki's position was that he was protecting moral principles. To surrender would be to admit that might makes right. Neither could yield without losing face. Neither could win without destroying what they fought over. Anu could have broken the deadlock. His word would have been accepted by both sides, however grudgingly. His intervention could have saved Eridu. But the intervention never came. The silence continued. And when the weapons were finally deployed, Anu did nothing to prevent it. Was this calculated permission? Did Anu secretly want the conflict resolved through destruction? Or was it simply that by the time the weapons were ready, intervention was no longer possible? Events had their own momentum. Even the supreme authority could not stop them. We cannot know, but we can recognize the pattern. When those with power to prevent catastrophe choose not to exercise that power, catastrophe becomes more likely. Anu's silence is a lesson in the responsibilities of authority. Power that refuses to act is not neutral. It enables whatever fills the vacuum. The civilizations that emerged after the evil wind carry traces of what came before. Egypt rose in the Nile Valley, seemingly from nowhere. Suddenly there were pyramids. Suddenly there was writing. Suddenly there was a complex society with sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and engineering. The Egyptians themselves said their civilization was a gift from the gods, from beings who came from the stars and taught them everything they knew. The god Thoth, in particular, was credited with giving writing, mathematics, and medicine. Thoth, depicted with the head of an ibis, was a teacher god, a civilizer. Compare Thoth to Enki. Both were associated with knowledge. Both were teachers. Both gave the arts of civilization to humanity. Different names, same function. Perhaps the same being, remembered differently in different regions. The Indus Valley civilization emerged with similar suddenness. Complex cities with advanced sanitation, standardized weights and measures, writing that has never been deciphered. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were planned cities. Their layouts show sophisticated urban design. Their engineering shows knowledge that should not have existed at that date. And then they were abandoned. Suddenly. Completely. The people disappeared and never returned. The radiation signatures suggest why. The evil wind reached even there, thousands of miles from the original blasts. The fallout did not respect geography. China's early civilization similarly appeared developed. The Yellow Emperor, their legendary founder, was credited with bringing civilization from elsewhere, with arriving already knowing what to teach. The pattern repeats, sudden emergence attributed to divine or extraterrestrial teachers, knowledge that seems too advanced for its time. These civilizations were not independent inventions, they were restoration projects, attempts to rebuild what the war had destroyed, using whatever knowledge survived. The teachers who established them may have been surviving Anunnaki, or they may have been humans carrying encoded knowledge, implementing what they had been taught before the catastrophe. Either way, the post-war civilizations were continuations, not beginnings. They carried forward what Eridu had represented in diminished and fragmented form. We are heirs to those restoration projects. Our knowledge, our technology, our cultures trace back through unbroken lines to the survivors of the evil wind. We are the children of catastrophe, the descendants of beings who refuse to let knowledge die completely. The search for the Hall of Records has occupied researchers for generations. Edgar Cayce, the American mystic, predicted that a chamber beneath the Sphinx contained records from before the flood, records from the civilization that preceded conventional history. Egyptian tradition speaks of chambers beneath the Giza Plateau that have never been fully explored, tunnels that lead to sealed rooms, spaces that radar surveys suggest exist but that have never been opened. The Egyptian government has resisted excavation in these areas. Official explanations cite preservation concerns. Unofficial speculation suggests concern about what might be found. If the records exist, if they contain what the traditions suggest, their discovery would overturn everything we think we know about human history. That kind of disruption is threatening to established institutions. Those whose authority rests on current narratives have reasons to prevent discoveries that would challenge those narratives. But the search continues. Independent researchers, ground-penetrating radar surveys, analysis of ancient construction techniques that point to forgotten capabilities. The Yucatan Peninsula holds similar mysteries. The Maya spoke of records from before the Great Destruction, chambers beneath their pyramids that contained knowledge from the time of the gods. Some of these chambers have been found and explored. Most yielded artifacts, but not the comprehensive archives the legends describe. But the Maya pyramids extend deep into the earth. Tunnels and chambers remain unexplored. The full extent of what they contain is unknown. Tibet's traditions speak of hidden valleys and underground cities where ancient knowledge is preserved. Shambhala, the hidden kingdom, may be more than legend. The remoteness of the Himalayan region has protected it from the kind of systematic exploration that has occurred elsewhere. Vast areas remain unmapped. Mountains conceal what lies beneath them. If Enki distributed archives across the planet, they would be in places like these, remote, protected, awaiting the time when humanity was ready to receive them. The technology to find them is improving. Satellite imaging can detect buried structures. Seismic analysis can map underground spaces. Drone surveys can reach areas that have been inaccessible. The 21st century may see discoveries that were impossible in earlier eras. The archives may finally be found because we finally have the tools to find them. And when they are found, everything changes. The story we have been told about ourselves will have to be rewritten. The genetic awakening may not require external discovery at all. If information is encoded in human DNA, it may activate on its own schedule, triggered by conditions that Enki anticipated, emerging when humanity reached a certain level of development. Many traditions speak of spontaneous awakening, enlightenment that arrives without external cause, sudden expansion of consciousness that transforms ordinary humans into something more. The Buddha, the Christ, the awakened masters of every tradition, beings who achieved states of awareness that seemed impossible, and who claimed those states were available to anyone. What if they were right? What if the potential for awakening is written into our genetic code, waiting to be activated? The triggers might be internal. Certain practices, meditation, contemplation, focused awareness, might activate dormant sequences. Or the triggers might be external. Certain frequencies, certain exposures, certain combinations of conditions might switch on what has been sleeping. Or the triggers might be temporal. Certain points in cosmic cycles, certain alignments, certain moments in the larger pattern might initiate activation across the entire species. The Mayan calendar's end date generated enormous speculation about mass awakening. The prediction was crude, and the date passed without obvious transformation. But transformation might be gradual. The awakening might be happening now, slowly, individual by individual. Each awakened consciousness contributing to a collective shift that will eventually become unmistakable. The signs would be subtle at first. Increased intuition, expanded empathy, capabilities that seem impossible by conventional understanding. These signs are appearing. Reports of anomalous abilities are increasing. Children are born who seem different from previous generations. Conventional explanation attributes this to better nutrition, education, information access, and these factors certainly play a role, but they may not be the complete explanation. Something else may be happening, something that the conventional framework cannot accommodate. The awakening, if it is occurring, would be resisted by those whose power depends on keeping humanity asleep. There would be efforts to suppress it, to explain it away, to prevent it from reaching critical mass. Those efforts may be visible if you know what to look for. Narratives that discourage questioning, systems that reward conformity, influences that keep people focused on survival and consumption rather than growth. But suppression can only delay, not prevent. If the awakening is encoded in our nature, it will eventually express itself. Pressure cannot contain it forever. The question is not whether awakening will happen, but when. and what the world will look like when it does. All of this brings us to a fundamental choice. We can dismiss the story of Eridu as mythology, file it with other ancient legends, return to the narratives we were taught and the assumptions they rest on. That is the safe choice, the comfortable choice, the choice that does not require us to change anything about how we see ourselves or our world. Or we can take the story seriously, not necessarily as literal truth, but as possibility worth investigating, as a framework that might explain anomalies that conventional frameworks cannot accommodate. That choice is harder. It requires questioning what we have been told. It requires accepting uncertainty. It requires the humility to admit that our current understanding might be wrong. But it is also more interesting, more alive, more engaged with the mystery of existence. The story of Eridu does not demand belief. It invites investigation. It offers a lens through which to view evidence that does not fit established narratives. Look at the anomalies, the sudden emergence of civilization, the physical evidence of extreme heat events, the genetic sequences that conventional evolution does not explain, the consistent themes across independent mythologies. Either these anomalies are meaningless coincidences, or they point towards something the establishment has not acknowledged. You do not have to decide tonight. The evidence will still be there tomorrow. The questions will still be waiting. But notice how you feel. Notice what resonates. Notice what you cannot quite dismiss, even if you want to. Those reactions are data. They tell you something about yourself, about what your deeper awareness recognizes, even when your conscious mind resists. Trust those reactions. They may be Enki's codes stirring, the encoded awareness beginning to activate, the awakening starting quietly in the privacy of your own consciousness. The story of Eridu is an invitation to look more closely, to question more deeply, to consider possibilities that conventional education did not offer. Accept the invitation or decline it. The choice is entirely yours. But know that the choice matters. What you do with this information shapes what you become, and what you become contributes to what humanity becomes. Individual choices aggregate into collective outcomes. Your awakening or your continued sleep affects everyone. That is the weight of consciousness, the burden and the gift that Enki gave. We are not separate from each other. We are nodes in a network. What happens in one node affects all the others. Choose wisely. Choose consciously. Choose with awareness that your choice matters more than you might think. Let the night settle now. Let the questions rest without forcing answers. Somewhere above you, stars burn that have burned since before Earth existed. They will burn long after everything we know is gone. Against that scale, our conflicts seem small. Our certainties seem fragile. Our importance seems questionable. But scale is not meaning. The universe may be vast, but consciousness is precious. Wherever it exists, it matters. You matter. Your awareness matters. Your choices matter. Not because you are large, but because you are aware. The Anunnaki, for all their power and longevity, face the same questions we face. how to live, how to treat others, how to handle disagreement. They failed to find good answers. Their failure devastated a world and echoed through thousands of years of human suffering. We have the chance to find better answers. We have their example to learn from. We have capabilities they lacked. Let us use them wisely. Let us learn from what destroyed them. Let us honor what they sacrificed by doing better. The story of Eridu ends in destruction. But stories do not have to repeat. Patterns can be broken. Cycles can be transcended. That is the message. That is the hope. That is the possibility that makes all of this worth considering. Tomorrow the sun will rise, as it has risen since before humans existed to see it. The world will continue. Life will continue. You will continue. What you bring to that continuing matters. What you have heard tonight can change how you see tomorrow. Let it. Let the story work on you. Let the questions deepen. Let the possibility of something larger than you have been told expand your sense of what might be true. The gods went silent. But silence is not absence. Silence is waiting. Perhaps they are waiting for us. Waiting to see if we can do better than they did. Waiting to see if their children can heal what they could only break. Let us not disappoint them. Let us not disappoint ourselves. Let us not disappoint the future that depends on what we choose now. There is still more to examine in the evidence that remains, the physical traces, the genetic anomalies, the search for archives that may yet be found. And wake tomorrow ready to make those dreams real. Let us examine the weapons technology more carefully, because its description in the ancient texts is remarkably specific. The 7 weapons of terror were not all identical. The texts describe different types for different purposes. Some were designed for area destruction. These are the ones that match nuclear weapons most closely. Massive releases of energy that vaporize targets and spread contamination. Others were designed for precision strikes, directed energy that could destroy a specific target without affecting the surrounding area. Still others were designed for disruption rather than destruction. Electromagnetic pulses that would shut down technology without killing directly. This diversity suggests sophisticated military doctrine. The weapons were tools for specific purposes, not blunt instruments for raw destruction. The Gandiva, described in the Mahabharata, was a bow that could fire different types of arrows. Each arrow had different effects. Some exploded. Some sought targets. Some returned after striking. This description matches modern smart weapons precisely. Programmable munitions that can be configured for different missions. Guidance systems that track targets. Reusable drone weapons. The Brahmastra was described as a weapon that could not be recalled once launched. It would pursue its target until destruction, regardless of obstacles or defenses. This matches cruise missiles or autonomous weapons, systems that lock onto targets and pursue them until mission completion without further human guidance. The descriptions span cultures that had no contact with each other: Sanskrit texts from India, cuneiform tablets from Iraq, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese chronicles. Each describes the same capabilities in different terms, the same technology filtered through different languages and different cultural frameworks. Conventional archaeology explains this as coincidence or cultural diffusion. But cultural diffusion requires contact, and these cultures were separated by geography and time. The alternative explanation is simpler. They were describing real technology they had witnessed. The same technology present across the globe, described by different observers. The fallout from these weapons is also described consistently. The evil wind, the cloud of death, the invisible killer that spread from the blast sites. The symptoms are radiation sickness. The spread pattern is fallout distribution. The timeline matches what we know about how contamination moves through atmosphere. These ancient observers did not know what radiation was. They did not have nuclear physics. But they described what they saw with enough precision that we can recognize it. That precision is compelling evidence. You cannot accurately describe something you have not witnessed. The descriptions are too specific to be imagination. The parallels between traditions deserve closer examination. Consider the flood narratives. The Sumerian account describes Ziusudra, warned by Enki that the gods plan to destroy humanity. He builds a boat. He survives. He is granted immortality for preserving human life. The Akkadian version calls him Utnapishtim. The Hebrew version calls him Noah. The Greek version calls him Deucalion. The Indian version calls him Manu. Different names, same story. A righteous individual warned of coming destruction. A vessel constructed to survive. A new beginning after the waters recede. The flood itself may have been literal, a geological event like the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose dramatically and coastal civilizations were inundated. Or the flood may have been metaphorical, a memory of the evil wind and its aftermath, when civilization drowned not in water, but in contamination. Either way, the consistency across traditions suggests a common origin. An event significant enough to be remembered across cultures, significant enough to shape religious narratives for millennia. Consider the creation narratives. The Sumerian texts describe humanity created from clay mixed with divine essence. Genesis describes Adam formed from dust with divine breath. Egyptian texts describe humanity molded on a potter's wheel by the gods. Clay and dust and molded substance. Divine contribution that makes the material come alive. The framework is identical, even when the details vary. This framework matches genetic engineering precisely. Taking base material, the biological substrate, and adding something that transforms it, the genetic modification that creates consciousness. Consider the narratives of divine conflict. The Sumerian War of the Gods, the Greek war between Olympians and Titans, the Norse Ragnarok, the Hindu wars between Devas and Asuras. Each describes powerful beings fighting among themselves. Each describes destruction that affects the mortal world. Each describes a new order emerging from the conflict's resolution. The Anunnaki Civil War, filtered through thousands of years of retelling, would produce exactly these narratives. The core events would persist, while the details adapted to local contexts. This is how memory works. The essential pattern survives, while the surface features change. The story remains recognizable, even when the names and settings transform. Consider the narratives of lost wisdom. Atlantis sinking beneath the waves, taking its knowledge with it. The Library of Alexandria burning, destroying irreplaceable texts. The Maya books destroyed by Spanish priests. Each culture remembers a time when more was known, a golden age when wisdom was accessible, a catastrophe that ended that age and left humanity diminished. The fall of Eridu fits this pattern precisely. A center of knowledge destroyed, wisdom lost that had taken millennia to accumulate. Humanity starting over with only fragments of what had been. These consistent themes across independent cultures are not coincidence. They are memory, fragmented, transformed, adapted, but memory nonetheless. We are heirs to that memory. It lives in our myths, our religions, our deepest cultural assumptions. We carry Eridu's story without knowing we carry it. The question of consciousness runs deeper than we usually acknowledge. We take consciousness for granted. We wake each morning into subjective experience. We see, we hear, we feel, we think. It seems natural, inevitable. But it is neither natural nor inevitable. Most matter in the universe is not conscious. Most processes happen without subjective experience. Consciousness is rare and precious. Why does it exist at all? What purpose does it serve? These questions have no satisfying answers in conventional frameworks. Evolution explains how organisms survive and reproduce. But consciousness does not obviously improve survival. Zombies, beings that behave exactly like us but have no inner experience, would survive just as well. Why, then, did evolution produce consciousness? Why did nature bother with subjective experience when behavior alone would suffice? The question becomes more tractable if consciousness was not evolved but engineered. If it was introduced deliberately by beings who understood what they were doing. Enki, according to the text, gave humanity the capacity to know, not just to behave intelligently, but to experience that behavior from the inside. This suggests consciousness has a purpose. It was given for a reason. It serves some function that the giver considered important. What might that function be? Awareness allows reflection. Reflection allows learning beyond mere conditioning. Learning allows growth beyond original parameters. Consciousness is the capacity to transcend programming, to see patterns and question them, to imagine alternatives and work toward them. A conscious being can do things its creators did not anticipate, can grow in directions that were not planned, can become more than it was made to be. This may be exactly why Enki gave it, not to create better workers, but to create beings capable of growth, beings who could eventually become equals rather than servants. That possibility terrified Enlil. Workers who might question their role, servants who might demand partnership, creations who might surpass their creators. The conflict between Enlil and Enki was not just about humans. It was about the nature of creation itself, whether created beings should be limited or allowed to grow without bounds. That question remains relevant. We create artificial intelligences. We engineer organisms. We are becoming creators ourselves. Will we make Enlil's choice, limiting our creations to serve our purposes? Or will we make Enki's choice, giving them the capacity to transcend what we intended? The answer to that question will shape the future as profoundly as the Anunnaki's answer shaped the past. The technologies we are developing mirror the technologies the texts describe. CRISPR allows precise genetic editing. We can modify DNA with unprecedented accuracy. We can introduce new sequences, remove existing ones, reshape the genetic code. This is what the texts described the Anunnaki doing, taking existing organisms and modifying them for new purposes, creating hybrids that combined different sources. Artificial intelligence is approaching capabilities that once seemed impossible. Pattern recognition, natural language processing, creative problem solving. The MEs that Enki guarded were information storage, knowledge that could be transferred, applied, shared. Our digital systems serve the same functions. Nuclear weapons exist in arsenals around the world. The capability that destroyed Eridu is in human hands now. The 7 weapons of terror have terrestrial equivalents. Space travel is developing beyond government monopolies. Private companies are launching satellites, planning colonies, reaching for the stars. The capability to leave Earth, to establish presence elsewhere, to become a multiplanetary species is approaching. We are developing what the Anunnaki already possessed. This convergence is not coincidence. Either we are following a natural progression that any technological species would follow, or we are remembering capabilities that were once known and lost. The ancient astronaut hypothesis suggests the latter, that we are not inventing, but rediscovering, that the technologies we develop are technologies that existed before, in forms we are slowly reconstructing. If that hypothesis is correct, then we know where this path leads. The Anunnaki developed these capabilities and destroyed their greatest achievement with them. We are approaching the same fork in the road, the same choices they faced, the same possibilities for creation or destruction. Will we repeat their mistakes? Will we let conflict escalate until the weapons are deployed? Will we destroy rather than compromise? Or will we learn from their example? Will we find ways to live with disagreement that do not require annihilation? Will we be wiser than our creators? That question hangs over everything we do. Every political conflict, every technological development, every choice about how to handle our growing power. The story of Eridu is not just history. It is prophecy in reverse. A vision of what happens when beings with godlike power cannot control their conflicts. We are becoming those beings. The prophecy is becoming relevant to us. What we do next will determine whether we prove the prophecy right or prove that it can be averted. Memory shapes reality more than we usually acknowledge. What we remember, we perpetuate. What we forget, we release. The stories we tell ourselves become the world we inhabit. The Anunnaki understood this. When they decided that humanity must not remember, they were not being paranoid. They were being practical. A species that knows it was created has a different relationship with its creators than one that believes it evolved naturally. Knowledge of origin is knowledge of dependency. By suppressing memory, they transformed the relationship. Humanity no longer waited for instruction. Humanity believed it had to figure things out for itself. That belief, even if founded on false premises, had real effects. Humanity developed independence it would not have developed otherwise. The irony is profound. By hiding the truth, the Anunnaki may have accelerated the growth they feared. By forcing humanity to stand alone, they made humanity stronger. The amnesia was not entirely negative. It created space for self-determination. It allowed humans to define themselves rather than being defined by their creators. But now the amnesia is lifting. The evidence is accumulating. The questions that were suppressed are returning. How will humanity handle the return of memory? Will we regress to dependency? Will we seek to restore the relationship that was interrupted? Or will we integrate the knowledge into the independence we developed? Will we acknowledge our origins while continuing to chart our own course? The healthiest response is probably the latter. Knowing where we came from does not mean we must return there. Acknowledging our creators does not mean we must obey them. Parents raise children to become adults. Good parents celebrate when their children surpass them. Good creators delight when their creations exceed their expectations. Enki seems to have been that kind of creator. He gave humanity consciousness specifically so that we could grow beyond our original design. Honoring that gift means using it, growing, developing, becoming more than we were, not to spite our origins, but to fulfill them. The return of memory should be empowering, not limiting. It tells us we are part of something larger. It tells us we have potential we have not yet accessed. It also tells us we have responsibilities. The beings who made us are watching, perhaps, waiting to see what we do with what we were given. Let us give them something worth watching. Let us show that consciousness was a gift worth giving. Let us prove that humanity was worth the price Enki paid for our survival. All these threads weave together into a single tapestry. The story of Eridu, the war of the gods, the creation of humanity, the awakening that is approaching. Each element connects to every other. None stands alone. The pattern is coherent, even if particular details remain uncertain. That coherence is itself evidence. A story that makes internal sense, that explains anomalies conventional narratives cannot explain, deserves serious consideration. You do not have to believe every detail. Belief is not the point. Attention is the point. Willingness to look is the point. The story asks you to consider possibilities that conventional education dismisses. That consideration, regardless of conclusion, expands awareness. Expanded awareness is the beginning of awakening. The encoded potential activates when we start paying attention. The circuits come online when we use them. That is why this story matters. Not because it is certainly true, but because engaging with it changes you. Questions shape the questioner. You have spent time tonight with questions that most people never consider. Questions about human origin, about cosmic conflict, about encoded potential. That time was not wasted, even if you conclude that the story is fiction. The questions themselves have value. The expanded perspective persists. But if the story is not fiction, if even part of it reflects genuine history, then you have touched something important tonight. You have connected with your own deeper nature. You have remembered something that was meant to be remembered. You have participated in an awakening that has been building for millennia. That possibility makes everything we have discussed tonight significant. Not as entertainment, though I hope it has been entertaining, as participation in something real. The story of Eridu continues. We are part of it. What happens next depends partly on what we do. Let us make it a good story. Let us add chapters worth reading. Let us honor our origins by creating a worthy continuation. Consider the scale of time we have been discussing. 400,000 years since the mission began. 4,000 years since Eridu fell. 4,000 years of human civilization struggling to rebuild. Against geological time, even 400,000 years is brief. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Humanity's entire existence is a thin layer at the very top of that immense span. But against human time, these spans are almost inconceivable. 4,000 years includes all of recorded history, every civilization we know, every name we remember. The fall of Eridu happened before any history we have been taught, before Babylon, before Egypt's pyramids, before anything we call ancient. And the mission that created Eridu began 400,000 years before that. A span of time that swallows everything we think of as human experience. The Anunnaki, if they live still, have watched all of it. The rise of every empire, the fall of every civilization, the slow climb of humanity from devastation to capability. What must that perspective be like? To watch generations come and go like seasons, to see patterns repeat across millennia that humans experience only once. That perspective might produce patience we cannot imagine, or it might produce indifference we cannot fathom. Either way, it is profoundly different from our experience. We live in moments, they live in eons. We see events, they see patterns. The most profound mystery may be the waiting itself. If Enki encoded information in human DNA, he did so knowing it would take thousands of years before we could read it. He planted seeds that would not sprout in his presence. That requires extraordinary faith. Faith that the seeds would survive. Faith that conditions for growth would eventually arrive. Faith that the harvest would justify the planting. We plant trees whose shade we will never enjoy. We build institutions whose benefits will accrue to people not yet born. This is what makes us human in a way, the capacity to care about futures we will not see. Enki extended that capacity across millennia. He cared about what we might become thousands of years after his departure. He invested in a future that felt unimaginably distant. That investment is now maturing. The technology to decode genetics is developing. The awareness to search for encoded information is spreading. The moment he anticipated is approaching. What will we find when the decoding finally happens? What message did the Father leave for children he would not live to see grow? Perhaps gratitude. Perhaps pride in what we have accomplished. Perhaps instructions for what comes next. Perhaps grief. Perhaps apology for the war that devastated our world. Perhaps regret for what could not be prevented. Perhaps all of these, mixed together in ways our emotions can barely process. The complexity of a relationship across time that has no precedent in human experience. The question that haunts this entire narrative is whether we are worthy of what we were given. Enki thought we were. He risked everything for our survival. He gave consciousness to beings who were designed for servitude. He believed we deserved more than our original purpose. Enlil thought we were not. He saw us as tools that had exceeded their parameters. He believed we would cause problems that justified our control or elimination. 4,000 years later, which judgment seems correct? We have done terrible things. Wars, genocides, environmental destruction. The litany of human evil is long and detailed. But we have also done remarkable things, art, science, philosophy, acts of compassion that defy self-interest. The litany of human achievement is equally long. We are capable of both. That was Enki's gift. Consciousness allows choice. And choice means we can choose destruction or creation, hatred or love, closure or growth. The evidence is not yet complete. We are still writing it. Every generation adds entries to the ledger. Every choice shifts the balance. The judgment, if judgment there is, cannot be rendered yet. We are not finished becoming what we will become. But we can influence the outcome. We can choose to add entries that support Enki's faith in us. We can demonstrate that consciousness was a gift worth giving. Or we can prove Enlil right. We can let our conflicts consume us. We can destroy ourselves before we fulfill our potential. The choice is ours. It always has been. That is what consciousness means. We are not determined by our origins. We determine our destinations. Beneath all the diversity of human cultures lies a unity that this story helps explain. We have different languages, different customs, different beliefs, but we share common patterns that transcend those differences. The Golden Rule appears in every major culture. Treat others as you would be treated. This principle emerges independently wherever humans gather. The sense of the sacred appears universally. The feeling that some things matter beyond immediate utility. The intuition of meaning that transcends material existence. The drive to understand appears everywhere. Questions about origins, questions about purpose. The refusal to accept ignorance as final. These commonalities are not coincidence. If we share common origin, if we carry common encoding, then common themes in human experience make sense. We are one family, scattered across the earth, developing in different directions, but sharing fundamental nature. The differences are real, but the unity is deeper. That unity should inform how we treat each other. Strangers are not truly strangers. They are distant relatives, carrying the same encoding, facing the same questions. Conflict between humans is, in a sense, family conflict. And family conflict, for all its intensity, should not be terminal. Blood remains thicker than disagreement. The story of Eridu was family conflict carried to catastrophic extreme. Brothers who could not reconcile, factions who could not coexist, a family that destroyed its greatest creation rather than find accommodation. We need not repeat that pattern. We can acknowledge our unity even while respecting our differences. We can find ways to live together that do not require elimination of the other. That is the hope embedded in this narrative. Not that we are special, but that we are connected. Not that we are chosen, but that we share choosing. The night deepens. Somewhere a clock marks time that connects your moment to every moment. You have traveled far tonight, from Eridu to the present, from creation to destruction to possible rebirth. What you carry from this journey is yours to determine. The story cannot force conclusions. It can only offer perspectives. Perhaps you will remember certain images, the Abzu glowing beneath the ziggurat, the evil wind spreading across Mesopotamia, Enki weeping over his ruined city. Perhaps you will remember certain questions. What is encoded in my DNA? Who were my true ancestors? What potential awaits activation? Perhaps you will remember the feeling, the sense that history is larger than you were taught, that you are part of something that extends beyond what you can see. Whatever you remember, it has become part of you now. Stories that enter us, change us. Questions that we seriously consider reshape how we think. You are not the same person who started listening tonight. You cannot be. Attention transforms the one who pays attention. That transformation, however subtle, ripples outward. You will speak differently tomorrow. You will see differently. You will wonder about things you never wondered about before. And those changes will affect everyone you encounter. Transformation is contagious. Awakening spreads from mind to mind. This is how change happens. Not through dramatic revelation, but through accumulated shifts. Each person who questions changes the field of possibility for everyone. You have contributed to that change tonight by listening, by wondering, by allowing questions to form that you did not have before. Thank you for that contribution. It matters more than you might think. Before we close, one final invitation. If anything tonight resonated with you, if any question refused to let go, follow it. Research what interests you. Explore traditions that intrigue you. Investigate anomalies that conventional explanations leave unsatisfied. The awakening is collaborative. Each person who searches adds to the collective understanding. Each question pursued contributes to the larger picture. You do not need credentials or resources or special access. You need curiosity and persistence, and willingness to be surprised. Those qualities are distributed randomly. They appear in scholars and truck drivers, in young people and old, in every culture and every condition. If they appear in you, then you are part of this. The story of Eridu becomes your story. The search becomes your search. The awakening includes you. Accept that or decline it. The story continues either way. But it continues differently, depending on who joins the search. We are at a threshold, the convergence of capability and awareness and encoded potential. What happens next depends on choices that have not yet been made. Make yours consciously. Whatever you choose, let it be chosen, not defaulted into. The gods gave us the power to choose. Let us use it. That is how we honor them. That is how we prove the gift was worthwhile. The silence between stars holds secrets we are only beginning to suspect. Every ancient culture looked up at those same stars and wondered where the gods came from, wondered where they went, wondered if they would return. That wondering has not stopped. It has only been renamed. We call it astronomy now. We call it the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. We call it science. But the questions remain the same. Are we alone? Where did we come from? What is our place in the cosmos? The story of Eridu offers answers to those questions. Not final answers, not certain answers, but possible answers that merit serious consideration. We may not be alone. We may have never been alone. The loneliness we feel may be the loneliness of amnesia, not the loneliness of isolation. We may have come from somewhere beyond this world, from beings who crossed the vastness of space to establish a presence here. from creators who shaped us for purposes both practical and profound. Our place in the cosmos may be more significant than we imagine, not as the center of everything, but as a crucial node in a larger network, as children of a story that extends far beyond Earth. These possibilities do not require certainty to be meaningful. They require only consideration, only the willingness to hold questions open long enough to really feel them. Feel them now if you can. Feel the possibility that the stars are not empty, that the past is deeper than you were taught, that you carry codes waiting to be activated. That feeling, however fleeting, however uncertain, is the beginning of something, the first stirring of awareness that may eventually become full awakening. Do not dismiss it. Do not explain it away. Let it exist, however uncomfortable, however strange. You have earned it tonight by listening, by staying, by following this story to its end. Whatever comes next, whatever you conclude when morning arrives and daylight dissolves the mysteries of night, this moment has happened. This consideration has occurred. It has changed something, however slightly. It has opened something, however briefly. It has contributed to something, however modestly. That is enough. That is always enough. Small changes accumulate. Brief openings widen. Modest contributions multiply. The story of Eridu matters because every story that expands awareness matters. Every question that challenges assumptions matters. Every moment of genuine wonder matters. You have had such a moment tonight. May it not be your last. May it be the beginning of many. And may those moments, accumulated across a lifetime, lead you to wherever you are meant to go. The hour is late. The journey has been long. Rest now, knowing you have traveled far. Let sleep come gently. Let dreams carry you where waking cannot reach. Tomorrow, the world will be waiting, unchanged in its facts, but perhaps changed in how you see them. This has been Echoes of the Ancients. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it gave you something to think about, subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who asks questions about the past. Leave a comment telling me where you are, what time it is, and what resonated most with you tonight. Until next time, may your questions lead you to truth, and may your truth lead you to understanding. The gods went silent, but their story continues, and you are part of it now. Good night.